I'm Anna Rose. I am the host of a show called the Zero Knowledge Podcast. And today I'm here with John Cole from Hyperlane. Welcome to Sovereign Radio.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's great to finally meet you. Quick kind of side story, ZKV, another project that I am part of. We actually have been running Hyperlane infrastructure for, I think, like since the beginning.
Since the beginning, yeah. So, as back as it goes.
Yeah.
So.
And yet, so it's really been my teammates who championed it and who kind of have been doing it. So for me, it's actually great to get a chance to explore a little bit more how it works, how it's evolved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm happy to tell you all about it. It's be a fun one.
Before we start, though, your name, John Cole. So I asked you when I came in, sort of like, is it Cole, like K-O, Cole? I just learned that meant something a few months ago, but I hear you've been hearing this for longer.
I've been hearing this for as long as I've been in crypto, basically. It's usually when you travel to Asia or folks, from the mainland, and that was like, is that your real name, or is that like? I was like, no, it's
just to
swear.
Position yourself. Is it what does it stand for again? Like
key opinion leader.
Key opinion leader.
I'm not that self-important that I put it into my name. I swear it was my grandfather's work, but
amazing.
Yeah, it's been a good run.
Cool. Okay, so let's jump into Hyperlane. I mean, to me, I place it very firmly in like the bridging category. But let's talk a little bit about what problem did you see when you first started on this project? What were you trying to solve?
Great question. A great place to start. So, from our perspective, it felt like, I remember getting really interested in crypto in around 2016, and then learning that, wait, these internet computers are going to be so cool, but mine and yours can't talk to each other. And it seemed like very, very strange. And I remember thinking back, I grew up in Israel, 1996, I get my first internet connection. And me and my only other friend at school who had an internet connection, turned out we were on there were only two ISPs, and we're on different ones.
Oh,
and
no.
So they still had that, portal walled garden situation.
Whoa.
Can't go on the same sites, can't see the same things. But by a year from then,
they were
problem
connected.
Solved, yeah. And so I get into crypto, and it's like, well, this is going to be figured out by next year.
What year is that you got in?
2016, as an enthusiast. By 2017, it was kind of all I could think about. And, a year goes on. And then you're like, oh, well, Cosmos,
almost.
They're working on it. All right, it's going to happen.
IBC.
And then another year and another year and another year. And it gets to a point that you're like, it's nearly the end of 2021, and IBC is really starting to come on. And then we had things like Wormhole, but it seemed like people were really just focusing on, let me help you move some assets around.
And very one-to-one, place to place. There was specific bridges just from Ethereum to the Cosmos Hub, or Ethereum, usually
Exactly.
Ethereum to somewhere.
Yeah, and having, this view of, wait a second, I firmly believe that crypto has this monumental impact on the world, but we are, if we are going to kind of allow it to meet any type of global scale of demand, well, we run into this predictable problem where just a single chain, because it by definition limits the access to digital resources. If you increase that demand, you're going to run into the same problem every single time. So that Cosmos approach of just horizontal scaling, many computers, seemed like a given. So you have to have a way to connect them and to do that permissionlessly and extensively.
But they do, right? They always did. They had IBC.
Yeah, in Cosmos.
In Cosmos.
And then what it ended up happening, right? And when the time they were building Cosmos, if you told someone this is going to be the biggest ecosystem in crypto, that made perfect sense. No one doubted you, right? Ethereum was still in its infancy, and that was a very reasonable thing to say. But by that point in 2021, you're like, I like to think of, blockchains as countries or continents or whatever. And Ethereum was clearly the most boisterous, most populous continent.
Mm-hmm.
And over there, you had nothing like IBC, nothing that extensible. And certainly if you wanted to go across the border, you really didn't have anything.
Yeah.
And so it was IBC is the coolest design. How can we take it and just maximally extend it, make it just the most extendable thing that you can? And so the problem, really back to your original question, was, okay, so on the one hand, we're going to need a ton of these internet computers if this whole thing that we're all putting our life energy into is going to actually make the impact in the world that we think it can. And on the other hand, well, the tools that we have right now aren't as extensible. And so that was the thing we're trying to solve. Like, let's create a framework that would let anyone connect any chain and do that in kind of the most easy way possible. Because the idea that, oh, we are going to have some bridges, we are going to have interoperability, but it's either, kind of like ecosystem specific, or it's kind of gate kept where I need to go and I need to talk to your team. And, thanks to their good graces, or like me using, me paying their fees or whatever, then they'll honor me with their presence. No thanks. Like, let's create the framework that lets anyone do this on their terms and just go from there.
So I think there's lots of levels to look at bridging. I mean, one of the ways I sort of said this earlier about it was almost like one-to-one.
Yes.
Then there's sort of generation 2 is a little bit like many-to-many. And I think that's where Hyperlane would definitely fall. It's not individual bridges, right?
Yeah, that's right. So on the whole, really what it is, we kind of like put these mailboxes on each chain, and what they act is almost like a radio broadcast. So once you have one on your chain, you can put it there, someone else can, anyone in the world who wants to can. And then from there, it allows you to connect with any other chain that has it.
Yeah. Do you have to create like a secure connection between the two?
Not
like
between the two, but
this is I feel like that's such like a Web 2
no, it's a good
idea,
question.
but that like you have created a secure connection.
Yeah, so what you actually do is you create almost like a secure broadcast from that and emanates from there. So in Hyperlane, there's not a single security module. Anything that provides you with a state attestation or a state proof, and we can get a little bit more into that, is used to secure the messages on a chain. And the developer who sends that message can pick, okay, let's say there's a handful of modules on this chain that I'm on. I'll use like these validators, or I'll use like this ZK prover thing. And then that kind of can be basically broadcast to any other chain that feels that module looks fine to it. So let's say if you have it on like a ZK validator chain, and say you guys are securing it, now through that module, like that message can be picked up on any other chain that has Hyperlane. So it's not so much like a secure connection point to point, rather it's we have a module on this chain, it secures the messages going out of this chain, and then they can be picked up anywhere. So much more like a radio broadcast.
Does it get really messy in there though, if you're like getting all of these messages in? Like how do you, because I'm sort of picturing it as like, message goes in to this like pool.
Sorry, no, I didn't do it justice.
Okay.
So the sender basically says like, I know where I want it to go.
Okay.
But insofar as the security aspect, all they're securing the message going out of that chain. But the sender always says like, well, I want it to go to Ethereum, I want it to go to Arbitrum, I want it to go to Osmosis.
The destination.
Yeah, they specify the destination or destinations, but the task of securing it doesn't involve the destination at all. It only involves like the source.
Okay. What's doing the connection in between?
Great question. So that is also where there's a very meaningful similarity to IBC. Therein comes what we call the relayer. It's a very, very simple, basically like an off-chain bot. It doesn't play any role in the security of the system. All it does is it looks at all I guess it's a permissionless role. Anyone can run a relayer. And a relayer needs to be there and observe all the chains that you want a single relayer to connect. So let's say we want to connect Ethereum, Osmosis, and Arbitrum. So now we'll have our relayer and it'll look at those three chains. It looks at that mailbox. That's like the main developer touch point. That's what sends and encodes those messages. And then it sees, oh, Anna is trying to send something from Ethereum to Osmosis. So first thing is, Anna's going to get quoted the gas cost of what it'll cost to process this on Osmosis.
The other side, okay.
But you pay in Ethereum, in Ether, on what the relayer will be paying on your behalf on Osmosis. It picks up that message. It takes the signatures from whatever security module signed off on your message, and then it delivers it to the mailbox on Osmosis in this case. And so there's really like three components. There's the base contracts, mostly the mailbox.
Yep.
Then we need at least one security module. It can take form of any type of state attestation or a state proof. And we need the relayer to be like the glue that connects all of that.
But don't you have something on the other side? Like the
just the mailbox. Yeah.
To receive on the other side.
Yep,
So there's
yeah. So that same mailbox, both takes in inbound and outbound. So it like sends and receives.
Okay.
And so every chain that you want to be connected with Hyperlane will need a mailbox, will need a relayer in between it and the others.
I think I just followed that, but the second step for me is still a little bit vague. So it's like mailbox, I get it. Second step, still need to figure it out. Relayer, I get it. Mailbox, I get it. What's the second step?
The second step is that security portion where something is observing the mailbox and it sees, oh, Anna just sent the message. And then either if we're using some type of attestation module, this is one of the ones that you're running, you're participating in a security module where your validator is attesting to what's happening in that mailbox. It could also be something a little bit more complex, like some type of ZK prover. And then you sign off on it, that security module, the participants in it, like a ZK validator, sign off and say, oh, okay, Anna's message just arrived. It was in this block. It was been finalized. And then I post that signature. Now the relayer goes to get that signature from the module, and it takes that signature to the destination mailbox.
Okay.
So yeah, that was that middle portion.
You just said that it could be like a ZK prover too.
Yes.
Do you mean like prover, like in the prover, like prover network state, or
those could be
really?
Yes. Someone will need to do the work of because really a Hyperlane security module, all that it is, it's just a wrapper on some type of logic for a state attestation or a state proof.
Okay.
So like already today, people have built Hyperlane security modules that use, let's say, the first one was from a team called Electron Labs that had like a ZK prover between, I want to say Ethereum and I forget the two other chains. Now one is being worked on for Succinct's new prover.
Okay.
And so, so those can be used. Now, I think right now people still generally prefer the attestation ones just because they can be a bit faster and a bit cheaper. But you know better than anyone, right? Like the kind of the trajectory of both proving costs and proving times. And as soon as those really get under that, 30, 20 second range and start, from a gas perspective, being as competitive, like it's just a no-brainer.
For sure.
And so we built Hyperlane with that in mind, right? Like it's clear that that's the end game.
Cool.
And so you don't want to create a system where someone basically builds their entire chain's like interoperability infrastructure on this thing, but then the state of the art in crypto is always a moving target. So should they have to rip everything out and like move on? No, they should just be able to adapt the new security module. Everything else can stay the same and they're good to go.
Nice. Since you founded Hyperlane and Hyperlane started, there have been a lot of bridges. There were also some bridges before, around the same time. I think we should talk competitive landscape a little bit and maybe come from what was there. Because even though, I think you saw the problem of like there's not activity or it's difficult to get from one place to another, but there were solutions proposed.
Yes.
So let's talk about what was there at the start and then maybe what's happened since.
So what was there at the start insofar as like running and you had reason to believe that it had staying power. So
there's Wormhole.
Wormhole, yes.
Yeah. IBC.
It was gonna start with IBC.
Okay, sorry.
So IBC obviously there and was a huge inspiration, and folks like Zaki were kind of instrumental in helping us, get Hyperlane off the ground and like do the initial design. So Wormhole, Axelar, IBC, and just around the time that we, formed the thing, Layer 0 launched. And so those were really like, Layer 0 was the earliest at that point, but since then has become the largest player. And of course, all of those are still around. And now I think thanks to the architecture and the bet that we made, right, like 2.5 years ago, most people did not believe me when I was saying like this Cosmos thesis of just like kind of app chains everywhere. It is really the only thing that crypto is going to be able to use to scale. And so that's why we're building Hyperlane the way that we are. It was hard to even convince our team that this is what we
Wow.
should, like, they're like, no, let's focus only on the big chains. And I'm like, no, we're not doing that. We need to build this in the most open and permissionless and extensible way.
Cool.
And so since then, right, Hyperlane has come from, like, I'd say some relative obscurity to now, if you're kind of judging by overall like daily message activity, it most days is the second largest, right behind Layer Zero.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been a tremendous run. In the last 4 months, we've seen a
Wild.
ton of growth for it. Yeah.
So I think you've just described like where it was at the time, but like what, like, wait, let me start that again. You did just mention Layer Zero. Let me say that differently. Since that founding point, there have also been other forms of bridges. Can you, I mean, you just mentioned Layer Zero, which I think, are you saying that came around the same time?
Because they launched their first product in Stargate right around, I want to say it was March or April of 22.
Okay.
And that is basically like we'd been working on Hyperlane before, but when we formed the core development company that works on it, that today I run, is that was in March of 22 as well.
So similar timing.
Yeah.
Okay.
They'd been working on for like since a year before, but that's when they went live, and we went live, I don't know, later that year.
Okay. But what came after? So like since then, I know that there's bridges like Across.
Oh, so Across was actually live before, and now Across is, I definitely think of it as a bridge, but it is probably like the strongest player in this kind of intense, let us focus on the big chains and the biggest assets and try to be like as competitive when it comes to the pricing on those. So to us, Across is something that could use Hyperlane like as the rails for.
Oh, wow.
But in that sense, it's not, we don't think of Across as like being in the same competitive landscape. Like they are as good as it gets, I would say, like best in class in this. You want to move a big asset between big chains, whether it's ETH or USDC or anything of the sort. And Hyperlane is just about, you're spinning up a new chain and you want to be able to connect it with everything else. And then something like Across can exist on top of that and use it as the rails.
But since then, there have also been other ones. I feel like I'm hearing about, I mean, even in this series, there's a number of like interoperability solutions. They're not always
There's no shortage of them,
and they're not always built like Hyperlane. But yeah, what are some of the other like major players that you see kind of coming slightly into your space?
I guess no disrespect to anyone. None of the people who have come since I would consider to like be major players or people that even come up in conversation.
Okay.
It really basically is like these four of it's Layer Zero, Wormhole, XLR, and Hyperlane. And I'm sure once the others go live, like that might change a little bit.
Yeah.
But for now, they just don't come up.
Fair.
Yeah.
We didn't mention XLR so far, though.
Oh no, sorry. Then I was.
Yeah, so let's talk about them and how it's different. So, because XLR timing-wise, was it not also somewhat 2021, 22?
Yes, so XLR and Wormhole were already live. Then Layer Zero came,
you guys.
and then we came kind of the latest of the party.
So how would you say, like XLR, as I've always understood, they're like a chain themselves.
Yes.
They're like a zone, and then they have all of these links. They have a validator set. Every one of those is basically running like individual chain infrastructure, like the client infrastructure.
And so that has a huge positive side and the negative side. And the huge positive is you get to concentrate all this economic security on the XLR chain. You now get this large set of validators, every single one of them verifying the state incoming and outgoing from the chains that are connected through XLR. But that same thing that is the huge benefit is also the negative, because now if you want to add a new chain, everyone in the set needs to run it as well.
Wow.
And that can be very cumbersome.
Does that mean that they're more permissioned? Like, do they have to choose those more carefully?
Yes, I don't want to, suggest, but yes. In that sense, like, we very much view these players as providing a form of kind of permissioned interoperability, which again, it works incredibly well. But you can't go tomorrow and bring XLR to your chain on your own volition. You can't, but it's part of the design and it's part of what makes it really, really powerful. And this is where Hyperlane is able to make up all the ground, right? Because if someone wanted to, right? Like, let's say if the ZKV team was kind of here behind the curtain, they could put Hyperlane on any chain while we were sitting here and doing this.
Wow.
And I wouldn't even know it.
Yeah.
So every week we meet someone who is like, hey, I'm about to go into production. And it's like, no shit, that's the coolest thing in the world. And in that sense, Wormhole works somewhat similarly, where the chain doesn't play as big of a role, but same thing, where like all the validators need to run all of the chains and you have to coordinate between all of them to add the next one.
Cool. Okay, so that's a big difference there. We didn't really do a clear distinction with Wormhole. And Wormhole has changed too, right? Like it used to be a multisig. We knew that because when it got hacked, we found out how it worked.
Yes.
Has it evolved to be a little bit more like Hyperlane or?
Not yet, but they're certainly trying. I think kind of this imposition, what you'll see now is that this term permissionless interoperability was not really used until like a year and a half ago. And since we've started using it, it has become, I love it when you go on the Layer Zero website, they now front and center, it says that, and it has penetrated the language of many of the interoperability protocols, even if they don't actually offer it, but what I would consider to be offering it. And so Wormhole, I think, is trying to enter the fray in this regard by their foray into ZK.
Okay.
Because again, if your design was that, well, I need all the validators to run all the chains all the time, one way to kind of circumnavigate that would be, well, I don't need state attestations. I have state provers.
Oh, wow.
So as far as I know, that seems to be
the direction.
The direction, yeah.
And Layer Zero, I've never really fully understood either. So how does that compare?
I'd say architecturally the most similar, and the differences seem to be, maybe more like operational. But Layer Zero, for the most part, their labs organization with the help of, I think Google Cloud plays a role as well. They do that kind of what they call oracleization, which, for us is the state attestations that we talked about. And then now they've released something that's similar to what we call our interchain security modules, or ISMs. I forget what their acronym stands for, but it's DVN, where, the ZK validator, for instance, could run DVN that like oracleizes state through the Layer Zero endpoints, what we call a mailbox, they call an endpoint.
Okay.
And
by the way, I love that you're doing this like translation of terms between different systems so that people can actually see that it's like sometimes somewhat similar architecture, but everyone's renamed it. So
yeah,
I really appreciate that, actually. That's so good.
We have to all the time.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny to see once you're in it, when you realize like, oh, everyone is bringing their own words to mean the same thing. And sometimes we will use like different words to describe the same thing. And that's when it gets like really confusing for other people.
Yeah.
And like, I think if you're building in any industry, like you can't expect some random person to just know, forget even random person, like whoever your audience is, right? The people you're catering to, they have a busy life. Yeah. They're not going to just become familiar with your terminology just because. So this translation is kind of most of what you do as a founder, whether it's actually for terms or for what products do or like why they matter.
Well, I love hearing about this. And actually, I want to move on from just the competitor landscape, because I think by doing these definitions, it's been really helpful to like kind of match and compare. But let's talk more about like Hyperlane's status and maybe next steps. Like it's now been like, you said this, it's been live since 2022.
Yeah, and in 2022, it was really like this paper thin little toy, In crypto, there's always the urge, I think because we have a lot of perfectionists in the industry and a lot of academic backgrounds, and you wouldn't release a paper until it is done, right? There's no like, you don't do fast iteration on a paper, right? But so we were like, hey, we can either do that or we can release the narrowest, almost crappiest thing we can.
Yeah.
And we did that in the end of 22. And it's in its current state, like the last version came out, I want to say about 7-8 months ago. And that's really where things really started to take shape and take form. And the bridging for the Celestia launch for TIA as that main asset in Q4 last year was when things kind of started to take off. So it's a true statement that Hyperlane's been live since 2022. It's also a
not
true
in its full form.
Yeah, it's it was like this fledgling that could barely do and like was very janky, and you had to do a lot yourself. And from that time until where we are today, like a ton has changed.
And I guess you've brought on a lot of, or anyone who wants to has brought on lots of different connection points.
Yes.
How many things are connected now?
About over 50.
Oh wow.
Yeah, to the
Do you
last
also
count.
do you individually connect to roll-ups and stuff like that?
Yes. So that's
Okay.
really that's the kind of the bread and butter of Hyperlane is, today, whether it's through the amazing work of Celestia or the folks at Optimism and Arbitrum who've created these really nimble roll-up frameworks, and all the roll-up service providers like Caldera and Conduit and Anchor and AltLayer and all of them, they're making it easy for you to spin up a roll-up. Like I was trying to, in preparation for a talk I'm giving later today, I was like, let's run through this. And it took me about 47 seconds. I actually timed it before I had a roll-up running. On testnet, but still.
Still, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's like
unreal.
It's unreal, right? So that's our bread and butter, because if it takes you that little to get started, if it's 5 minutes to get the roll-up, it can't be 5 months before it can connect with everything else.
True. Yeah.
So that's where it's the most active. But Hyperlane also covers, there's Hyperlane on Solana, there's Hyperlane on a number of Cosmos chains like Neutron, and the Stride team, if you know them, they're self-hosting Hyperlane. So it runs there. They run every bit of it, like everything we talked about, from the security to the relayer. And now they're extending it to other rollups and Cosmos chains.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and like this could never happen if we went for that permission. Like our team has to do all of it.
Yeah. What about, like, is it for token? Something we didn't actually talk about is like what kind of bridge it is. So is it for token transfers, or is it for messages, or is it for both?
So messages is kind of like the base thing that it does. And then as a subset, we've created what we call warp routes, which those are like kind of like an out-of-the-box bridging concept to make it easy because again, most of these, new chains, new roll-ups, like you've basically created a new country, and now you want to be able to bring trade and commerce and activity to it. So that's the first thing that you think about. And so they deploy Hyperlane, then they can deploy what we call a warp route, and that is like a token bridging concept that can, we can go more deeper into that if you'd like. But that's what most people do with their Hyperlane deployment, although there's an increasingly large number of applications that use the messaging feature to do something other than just straight bridging.
Huh, cool. I don't know that we actually have time to go that much deeper into it,
good.
Because I do want to hear the what's next. We didn't quite get to so you sort of said now there's 90 chains, there's the message. It's like more the full-fledged Hyperlane that you would envision, I
Much
guess.
closer. Still a ton of work to do.
Okay, so what's next?
So what's next is, people who have worked with Hyperlane will recognize the Hyperlane CLI as kind of the main interface to deploy and manage Hyperlane, whether it's to deploy these bridges through it, to like change the security settings, and that needs to get even simpler than what it is today.
All right.
And so that's like a big effort for the development company. Some additional things that are coming is because of this open framework nature, many teams have taken to adopting Hyperlane for new VMs. So Hyperlane getting onto Cosmos, that wasn't our team that did that.
Okay.
That was a Cosmos-based team. A team, one of the largest oracles on Starknet, has just finished Hyperlane for Starknet.
So like in Cairo?
Yeah.
And when you say that, like on these different VMs, it's like written in a different language.
Yes.
Because you have to have it,
in a way that's compatible with all the existing Hyperlane deployments elsewhere. So our team has created like the implementation spec for how you can go ahead and do this everywhere else. And so the Starknet version's coming. Movement Labs did the version for Move.
Yeah.
There's a couple of other teams that are doing it for their more bespoke VMs, like Cadena and Rootstock and several others. So that's also going to be coming. And economic security is being introduced to Hyperlane first through the AVS that was just launched, but there's a few other big things coming on that front that I think people will get really excited about. And those really, I would say, are like the big things. Oh, and one thing that just got released, so I can talk about it as if it's like what's next is for these bridges, there's, we have warp routes is like the base concept. And people always say like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if those assets that are sitting there, if they did something, people were very familiar with Blast, like offering what they called native yield.
Yeah.
Now there's Blast for everybody. So we have this concept of yield routes, and it lets you as the deployer say, hey, the assets that go into this, the collateral here, put it in this, 4626 standard vault, and decide what to do with the yield, either give it all to the users, split it with your users. So that was released kind of in proto form a couple months ago. And there's
from one chain, like from one area, and you're doing that just somewhere else. Is that what you mean by that?
So same like token bridging as before, where like you deposit, say, on Ethereum, and then it gets broadcast to like Osmosis or Arbitrum or wherever. But that collateral, while it's on Ethereum, can be then deposited into a vault on that chain, so on Ethereum in this case.
Okay.
Yeah, that.
I see. Okay, so you can
while
use
it. While you're traversing the cosmos, you're doing fun stuff on Osmosis, your USDC is actually deposited into like this vault on Aave.
Got it. Okay.
And so that more features are being added to that, like to augment that feature beyond like the proto version that was released fairly recently.
Wow, this is getting very sophisticated.
We try, yeah. That's what, people just tell us like what they're looking for.
That's cool.
And we keep adding that. And also there's been a ton of, a lot of what I was talking about comes from just community support. Like it's been pretty wild to see like how many developers are willing to put effort into this. And I think a big part of it is they know that it's open. They know that at the end of the day, it's not like they're contributing their time for someone else. They're doing it for their own interest, and then they open source that work, and everyone else in the Hyperlane community can benefit from it.
Very cool.
Yeah,
thanks for sharing all of this with us. How are you feeling wrapping up Brussels? This is kind of like the last day, I think, officially.
Yeah, it's been great. I'll tell you this. I think the city got, and I was a detractor as well, which is unfortunate. Before I came here, I've had a great time. It's been for us, it's always fun to come out and see all the people that we don't get to see day to day, but work with very closely.
Yeah.
And at the same time, see all the new faces of people just like coming up to you and being like, we're just doing this with Hyperlane, we're doing that. And it's like, it's crazy to think, because like 2 years ago, no one gave a shit about this thing.
I have to say, I don't know if it's just like the interviews I did or where I've been, but like interoperability and bridging has been like a major theme for me all week. And so it's great this is actually also my last day here, and it's great to have this interview as sort of like the coda on that.
Yeah, but it makes sense to think about, like, we're here at this Modular Summit, and like the theme is everyone making their own chain. And so what I've been saying for a couple of years is just like, it's nonsensical if we don't have an easy way to connect those. And so it, to me, makes perfect sense that why like you'd feel that this is such a big theme here today.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for this.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And I want to say thank you for watching this episode of the Sovereign Radio. I hope you enjoy the next one.